Jedediah runs downstairs, stomping the whole way. When he arrives down, he shouts out,
"You have been giving me dream suppressants?"
Horace looks confused as he says,
Yeah, they're up to help you sleep. You were having nightmares and hurting yourself.
About what? Freddy Krueger?
His father looks horrified and says,
You start taking your meds. I need to talk to Dr. Campbell.
He rushed his father and shouts,
Enough fucking stalling. Freddy Krueger killed Mom. Who is he? How did he do it? And why isn't he locked up?
Horace responds,
Son,
Don't give me the shit. Tell me now, who is he?
Horace responds,
he was a child murderer. He's been dead for over 55 years. Your mother's father.
Jedediah looks confused and says,
If he's dead, then why did Mom write about him trying to get me, him getting closer?
Horace tears up a bit and says,
He kills people from their nightmares. He uses his legend to spread fear throughout the town. He typically went after kids or teens. He does go for adults sometimes, but their fear is much harder to manifest. Usually he possesses weaker people to kill them.
Jedediah, confused, said,
He didn't do that for Mom. And she was awake. Why the fuck was he able to get her? Why didn't you fucking tell me?
He slams him against the wall and his father yells back,
Do you think I don't get it? You think I just drink because I don't care? You lost your mother, and I lost my wife and daughter.
And Sakan's face changes from into regret as Jedediah looks horrified and says,
What are you talking about?
Horace then says,
Your mother was pregnant. From what we heard, it would be a girl. We were going to tell you on your birthday. Then she died.
Jedediah steps back and thinks to himself and asks,
How long was the pregnancy?
23 weeks. Bob hadn't come in yet.
Jedediah remembers this fact on baby's hearing from in the womb. She never told him, but she talked to herself and the baby heard it. The baby dreamed about Freddy. He killed Maggie from the baby. Jedediah starts to tear up and says,
Oh, this is all wrong. This is all wrong.
Horace, trying to comfort his son, speaks.
Look, let's get you to a doctor so we can work this out.
No. I need a walk.
He runs outside, his father calling for him, but Jedediah ran too fast to hear him. It took him all the way till he reached a bench halfway across town. He crashes and vomits profusely on the ground. He starts gasping for air. Think of the claw marks across her chest and stomach. He starts to think about it over and over in his mind, mumbling, 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you, to himself, until a hand touches his left shoulder.
Hey kid, you alright?
He looks up to see an elder man with gray hair, brown eyes, Caucasian skin, a white short-sleeved shirt, a metal hand, brown pants, brown shoes, and a 6 foot 1 inch tall man. Jedediah nods and says,
I've seen you. Mentioned on the news. The man charged with murder, the charges were dropped. Ash Williams, right?
The man nods and says,
You look like you can use a drink.
Jedediah looks down and nods. They arrive at the local motel. Ash pours out a glass of bourbon for himself and asks,
Hey kid, what do you drink?
Jedediah looks up.
Do you have a White Russian?
Ash looks in his fridge, pulling out a can. Cracking it open, handing it to Jedediah, takes it and gulps down a swig. Jedediah notices the hand and asks,
Why do you have a metal hand?
Ash Williams looks at it and he says,
You won't believe it.
Jedediah chuckles and says,
That there's so much shit, no one will believe. I think I can believe anything at this point.
Ash sighs.
Alright.
He sits across from him and continues after taking a sip from his bourbon.
About 42 years ago, an ancient evil got into it. I had to lap it off at the wrist.
Jedediah takes another gulp and asks,
What happened leading up to this? Well, there's an ancient book called the Necronomicon, Book of the Dead. I went up to this cabin where an old man was studying it. He thought he was getting the deluxe deal for the history of the universe, but instead he got more or less getting the bronze packet. His cabin became a place laced with Kandarian evils, possessing friends and lovers along the way. At one point, I had to fight these bastards in the 1300s. They gave me this potion. I said most of the magic words and got back here. But the Deadites followed me here. And I've been traveling all over trying to stop this nonsense. At least I was. I met a girl. Sweetest thing. We had a kid. We just started college now. So I'm just taking a break. What's your story?
Jedediah shrugs and says,
I'm a time-traveling god who has been meddling with history trying to save my mom, but now I screwed up because I can't go back to sleep because I got in contact with a dream demon that kills people in their sleep.
He takes another sip and looks up to see Ash's confused look and says,
Yep.
He just says as if to say without saying, and I believe you now that my story didn't faze you. Jedediah sits there as Ash says,
My wife Caroline and we faced this demon. The town doesn't know this, but Kruger is trapped in the Deadites realm. He can't hurt you in your dreams. As far as your time travel, I don't know if you can enter dreams of your past, so maybe avoid those.
Jedediah with some hope smiles as Ash says,
You know, I'm not sure saving your mom will help your life.
Jedediah responds,
Tell me, then, how will knowing I can save her and just choosing to let her stay dead help?
He then pulls out his wallet showing Caroline holding a baby. He points at the infant and says,
You can't outrun fate, kid. I found that out the hard way. Besides, bad things happen in life, but good things can happen, says Cheryl Williams. If I hadn't gone through what I did with the Deadites, she wouldn't have been born.
Jedediah remembering that he would have had a sister if Kruger hadn't gotten to her, he sighs, finishing his drink, and says,
Thank you for the talk.
Ash stops him for a second and gives him a card and says,
In case you need to talk. Alright, kid?
Jedediah puts it in his pocket, then he shakes his hand coldly, then leaves. After stumbling with the White Russian in his system, probably walking for about 10 minutes, he arrives at the Crave and he enters to see Malcolm Tim eating ice cream. Tim starts setting up a domino trick, a curved line of them leading to a small wooden plank, your wife something nice balancing flat on a straw, and a domino at the other end. Above it is a cup he flicks. The one at the beginning, they all fall in place one after the other, the last one hitting the plank down, launching the last domino into the cup. The two laugh like crazy. Jedediah walks in and says,
Ice cream? Without Jennifer? Shouldn't you wait?
The two look at him in confusion as Tim starts to squint, then says in recollection,
Oh, he is talking about that girl that died in the hit and run. Do you remember Malcolm?
Malcolm responds,
He's been dead since 2008. Why would we wait for her?
Jedediah's face shifts to horror as he looks at his cut, how he set off chain events leading to her death. Jedediah decided that his mom can wait. He needs to undo his mess up. He quickly bolts out of the dinner, running home. He slams into the red door, entering his home. He sees his father sitting at the table waiting for him. Jedediah looks at him and says,
I'm going to bed. I have to undo something.
Seconds, he feels a needle prick his neck. He turns to see Dr. Campbell. Horace responds,
I didn't want to do this, but you stopped taking your meds. You wouldn't have remembered Freddy otherwise. We can't have you spreading this. We'll take you to Weston Hills. You'll be safer there.
Jedediah starts to realize he knows if he is taken to Weston Hills, he will be given Hypensil for the rest of his days. He punches Dr. Campbell in the nuts, knocking him down. He pushes the table into his father, and he quickly moves upstairs. The world around him starts to look like a brush painting. Somehow he makes it to his room, slamming the door shut, and uses what strength he has left, pushing his bed in front of the door. He hears slamming into the door. He then grabs the last picture of him, his mother, and father putting it into his pocket, and as he finishes he collapses, sinking into the bed. He is back in the hallway of portraits. He tries to find Jennifer's house. He runs to the left looking through portraits. He spots one of her house. He pokes his head and seeing her playing hopscotch, he steps in, closing the doorway behind him. He wakes up in his mom's car. He can hear Maggie and Horace freaking out. He can see blood on his wrist. He starts to realize his mom's car was what killed Jennifer. He spots her dropping a ball from her hand. Running out to the road, he mumbles,
"Jennifer, slow down."
His father turns around saying,
Don't worry, Jedediah. We'll be there soon.
In seconds, a massive bump. Hearing his mom say,
We need to stop.
Horace says,
It was an animal.
Jedediah slips back out of the portrait. He takes a breath and says,
Take the wheel, move it away from her.
He steps back and closing the doorway behind him. He in his weakened state jumps for the wheel, swerving it out of the way, but his mom puts him back in his seat as the dad turns the car back into the direction of Jennifer. Another bump. His mom says,
We need to stop.
It was an animal.
In seconds he realizes he is in a fixed event, but what would happen if he didn't fall asleep the prior night? Jedediah steps out of the picture, closing the flap of reality behind him, and goes by a portrait with a glove with knives for fingers. The next one over, he sees a portrait of a boy trying to stay awake, holding his eyelids open. He pops and closes the doorway behind him, taking possession of his younger self. He sits there feeling the wavelengths of being sleepy and being awake. He starts to think.
How long have I been awake for? A fucking week?
He tries to get out of bed to get a glass of water, but finds it hard to stand, so he decides to slam his head against the wall, hoping the pain keeps him awake. But seconds after that he starts to feel the pain numb. He then sits down, deciding to watch TV. He turns to his right, seeing fire and metal, then a chuckle. He turns again, seeing more of it, realizing he's in a boiling room, hearing chuckling all around him. Then roaring to life was the song, I hear the secrets that you keep. He turns around trying to escape the noise, and all he can make out is the palm of the glove with knives for fingers slashing down at him. He wakes up back in the car, seeing it happen again. He shouts,
No!
Then as they hit Jennifer again, he steps out into the timeline, closing the door behind him. He thinks and comes to the realization.
This wasn't always here. I did something to get Kruger into my head leading to this. If I don't read the diary, I will almost die. But less. Then they will never hear.
He goes back to the last Christmas, entering the portrait, closing the door behind him. He processes the kid version of himself, deciding not to do anything. He continues setting the presents under the tree. Then he jumps back out, opening the doorway, then exiting, closing it behind him yet again. He now moves forward in time to when the week started, poking his head, and he can see Jennifer hanging clothes like nothing ever happened. Then, as he sighs of relief, he comes to the realization.
Mom wouldn't have died if the baby didn't hear her talk about Freddy, which wouldn't have happened if Freddy had never became the nightmare killer.
He remembers what Ash told him and goes back to 2008 Christmas at Crystal Lake. He rushes back into earlier events to see when and how Freddy could be stopped. He makes it to a portrait with a blue vortex sucking, poking his head, and he sees the events play out.
Teach you how to play ball? I learned from my brothers, Freddy. The first thing you want is strike. All right. Ooh, what's up? You killed Freddy. Enough screwing around. It's time to...
Hey, Lipdicks. Come get some.
Yeah!
Oh! Carrie! The book! For God's sake, Carrie, read the damn passage! Get these bastards in here!
Some old bastard finally figured out how to play catch. And that's another one gave me the power to get reality to my hands. That means I'm not a savior playing grab ass with you two half. did you do? No! I'm not leaving! It's my time! It's finally my time!
Yeah, it's working. The vortex is sending them to the Deadites' realm.
Ash! I can't hold on! It's pulling me in too!
Don't let go! You just have to hang on for a few more.
There you are. Now let's set this house to rights. Now! I need you! See? I need you!
In seconds, he pulls his head out, closing the doorway, and continues seeing all of his defeats of Freddy Krueger, making sure to close the doorway each time. Eventually, he finds an old power plant on fire, poking his head in.
People, what happened to that?
We've
Gwen.
got to call the police. This is not the way to go.
This is for my son!
Ready. We know what you want.
I want it all!
Of course you do.
Then open up.
And you shall be
Forever!
And the explosion launches him to the ground. He gasps, then Freddy runs out, burning alive. He runs out, closing the door behind him. He thinks.
Uncle Doc mentioned something about dream demons.
He goes forward. He spots a portrait of a temple with tentacles with skulls on the ends of them. He pokes his head.
These are ancient dream demons. They roam the dreams of the living till they find the most evil, twisted human imaginable. Then they give them the power to cross the line and turn our nightmares into reality.
As they talk, he spots some paper. He holds out his hand, stopping time quickly. He steps in, grabbing the papers, reading through it. He sees that not only must it be the most evil person they can find, but it must be during a murder of a violent death.
Why did they burn him? He was obviously guilty. But why wasn't he just arrested?
He sets the papers back down, then quickly steps out, closing the door behind him. When he makes it back to the timeline, his nose begins to bleed and pain shoots through his head. He goes back further and spots a portrait of a blonde woman talking to a teenager holding a familiar glove. He pokes his head and he
You want to know who Fred Krueger was? He was a filthy child murderer who killed at least 20 kids in the neighborhood. Kids we all knew. Oh, Mom. It drove us crazy when we didn't know who it was. But it was even worse after they got him. Did they put him away? The lawyers got fat and the judge got famous, but somebody forgot to sign the search warrant in the right place, and Krueger was free just like that. What did you do, Mother? A bunch of us parents tracked him down after they let him out. We found him in an old abandoned boiler room where he used to take his kids. Go on. We took gasoline. Poured it all around the place and made a trail of it out the door. Then lit the whole thing up and watched it burn. I even took his knives. So it's okay now. You can sleep.
pulls his head out, closing the door, and thinks.
If the search warrant wasn't signed... If the search warrant was signed properly, he wouldn't have been violently killed. And he would die in prison in old age. No violent death. No dream demon deal. No dream demon deal. No nightmares for baby. No nightmares for baby. Both mom and the baby live.
He breathes a sigh and goes back further. A portrait of the police station. The cars were old models. This had to have been it. He sticks his head and he sees a guy singing some paperwork in a crowded office as Jedediah stops time, holding out his hand, hearing an echo cry and a
I won't tell.
from a little girl, and then looking over, he can see her holding a picture of Fred Krueger and her mother. He says a muffled,
Hey, Mom.
He goes over to the desk and sees the man about to sign the papers to have Kruger's wraith in. Then his head hurts and time speeds up again, hearing a man say,
Come take a look at this.
The man at the desk gets up, closing the paperwork, and some clueless desk clerk is about to grab them to file them away before they are signed. He holds out his hand again, hurting his brain, but he opens it back up to the right spot. Noticing a check on the person's desk reading a signature of Hugh Grant, he quickly grabs a pen, signing the work mimicking the signature perfectly. He puts the pen back and closes it. He looks over at his mom, saying,
See you at dinner time.
And flees through the doorway. He quickly runs through the hall, holding his breath, quickly stopping a day after when his mother died. Seeing a portrait of the three together having dinner, he runs further, not bothering with the rest. Spotting a portrait of his mother holding a baby girl, him standing proudly next to them, and his father wearing the Packer jersey holding his shoulders proudly, he cries tears of joy and decides to head back to the present. He runs so fast that as he turns his head right, he notices the glass wall is cracked. He keeps running, but still looking confused. He doesn't notice the wall he's about to hit. He falls back, rubbing his head. He gets up confused. Why, before it was seemingly endless. He taps it, confused, noticing the portrait on it, a dark circle with white filling the edges, lifeless, he thinks. With a crack of lighting, he turns to his right, back facing the wall of portraits. He spots the dream-like purple void with white rectangles, looking much less inviting, lighting shooting at each other. And then back his way, one of the bolts hits him, shocking him backwards into one of the portraits. He wakes up falling out of his bed. He sits up and says,
What was that? First things first.
He quickly runs down the stairs with joy on his face, shouting,
Mom? Dad?
But no response. He gets downstairs and the room was darker than normal, less sad and more horrifying, like the little color had been sucked out of the world. He looks around the room and spots a young woman, black hair, blue eyes, sweatpants and a pink brand shirt, same tone of pale. She looked about only a few years younger. He composes himself as she turns and responds,
Hi, Frederick.
He looks confused and says,
Name's Jedediah.
She looks confused and says,
No, your name is Frederick Krueger. You go by Fred or Freddy.
He then says,
Or you.
She looks at him and says in annoyance,
You don't have to keep joking about my memory issues.
He looks even more confused as she opens up a notebook with dates on it showing one reading. Frederick still doesn't understand. I don't have amnesia, I just can't make new memories. I lose every day I live. Be sure to show him this if he does it again. He looks at her and says,
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
She decides to play along and says in a bit of snark,
I'm Loretta Krueger.
He then explains,
Hello, Loretta. I don't know if you'll believe me. I did forget because I'm not from here. You see, I'm a time traveler. I went back, changed something, but because
she finishes,
a fulcrum point in time, so I can't remember the timeline I was currently on.
He confusedly asks,
How did you know what I was going to say?
She responds,
I told you these things. How I tried to go back and stop it, and somehow caused brain damage, so now I can't remember a day after the last time I tried. Now you're using it as a joke.
Jedediah, confused, then asks,
If you can't remember, why did you know that you tried explaining?
She then shows her notebook, saying,
I wrote it down.
He then nods and says,
What were you trying to change?
She gets annoyed, remarking,
This isn't funny. I'm sure I've told you that.
grabs her and yells at her again.
What were you trying to change?
And she says,
Ted's death.
He looks in horror. He quickly runs outside past the door that reads "Don't go out at night." He makes it to the graveyard shouting,
No, he's fine. That was a lie because she thought I was pranking her. No.
and in spots right where his mom was buried, Horace Kruger. He drops to the ground and grabs his head.
Why? Why?
He then looks up in fury and says,
Why won't you let me be happy?
He looks down as tears from then he hears something a bump, then he feels that he moves back, then he can see the ground pushing up. Then from an explosion of dirt his father's decomposing face with a horrible roar.